You guys good? All right, cool. You guys are probably wondering how to get dark mode, right, on RStudio. I can show you guys that. Yeah, very important question. So if you guys want dark mode, click on tools up at the top toolbar, go down to global options, I believe. Yeah. And then on this, just click appearance. And there's a bunch of themes that you can pick. What I have, I believe, is idle fingers, but they have a couple other dark mode options as well. So just pick whichever one you like and stick with that. And once you get yours picked, just press apply. Okay. Cool. So now the first thing that we're going to cover, I guess, is just kind of like the things that we have at the top right now. You guys should all see this, correct? Like these top 4 things. Okay, cool. So what this is essentially is a Markdown file. And with a Markdown file, you can have text as well as code embedded into that file. And essentially it just outputs as an HTML. So that way, you could read whatever text there is, and then whatever code you have inserted will show as well. So this thing up here we have is, so in order to get your file into a HTML, you can knit it. So this thing right here shows that, any code that you have within the file is going to be outputted. So everything over here that is outside, this is just the title right here, just kind of setting up the HTML as well as like title, author, date. And then you see these things right here are called chunks, right? Code chunks. And then it is signified by the 3 apostrophes, I guess, right here. So everything that you write in here is actual code. And once you hit run, it will actually run. And then everything outside, such as like this right here, this is all just text. So we can see here we have 2 code chunks that we already have, set up for you guys. And then this line right here, like I mentioned, is just to have the code appear when we do knit it to an HTML. And then this code right here is just, we are loading in a preloaded data set that comes with RStudio, which is the empty cars data set. And then on this second code chunk right here, we are loading in a library. But what you'll need to do first is you will have to install that library. So in order to do that, what you want to do is you just want to insert another line. You can just kind of put your cursor here, press enter, and then that will pull up another line. And then what you want to do here is you want to type install packages, and it should auto-populate here, and then parentheses. And once you get that, you just want to type in the title of the package, which in this case is first. And then what you want to do here is you just want to run, and it should install that package and then load it in. Oh, mine's already loaded in, so this pops up for me. But were you guys able to load that in? Give me a thumbs up once you guys got it. Oh, and I guess to run, sorry, I forgot to mention, but to run the chunk, you just press that play button on the right side. Let us know if you need help. We can come over. One of us can come over and help you guys.
once you run install that packages tidyverse, probably delete it after, so that way you can run that again.
Yeah.
So I'll try to reinstall it every single time. So let's install it once.
Comment it out.
All right. So I guess what we want to do first is we want to run this chunk as well, so that way we get to run before we move on. So on this first chunk right here, you can just run. Nothing should be outputted. This is just the kind of set some stuff. So I'll move on now. So this chunk right here is essentially just setting cars as our empty cars data set. So that's way it's a little bit more, I guess, common sense when you're calling it. So that way we don't have to type in empty cars every time we call the cars data set. So what we want to do is we want to run this chunk as well. And nothing should be outputted. It should just create another data set, essentially a replica, a replicate of the empty cars as a cars data. And then if you want to see your data, there's this pane up here where you have access to both your data sets, and what you can do to see it is just click on it, and it should open, and then you can see it in like a spreadsheet view with the cells, just like Excel or other spreadsheets. So we'll go back to our workshop file now, and we'll get started with some of the functions that R has. So the first one is going to be. Wait, do you have a question?
Yeah, no,
You have that.
that's fine. Kind of random. Okay.
Really?
Were you guys able to get it up there? Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy. None of these classes are easy at this point, but it's not too bad. I like it. I like art. I forgot what her name was. Very forgettable. Yeah, I wish I had friends.
Yeah. Well, if we get an error about knit R, it's because actually knit R tidyverse. So I think you need to install tidyverse first, and then knit R.
Yeah. What you can try to do for that is just put the install.packages up here. Tidyverse. And then once you run that once, then you can comment it out.
So tidyverse is like a library, so like there's a lot of like built-in that are flavors, but a lot of the most common.
All right.
Yeah, so once you install it once, you're good. But see that line right here called library fixer? That's letting the program. You only need library fixer, but you only need install. You need to only install. Yeah, my case is only you need to install.
All right, we'll get going with it since we're gonna try to fit in as much as we can in the next half an hour. So next thing you want to do, so we got to this point, we ran this chunk right here. You want to scroll down to the start of the workshop. And then what you want to do is have your cursor right here next to the title. Just press enter so you get more space in the chunk. And the first function that we're going to type is just get WD, which is essentially just getting the working directory that you're currently in. And this is helpful whenever you want to read in any data files and just, I guess, know where you are within your computer. So that way, you know exactly where to save that data file in order to access it when you are reading in data. So if you just do get WD with parentheses with nothing in it, and you run that, it just kind of gives you the directory that you're at right now on your computer. And I think that's where your R file is located. So that's just supposed to be the output right here. Supposed to be done. And then once you do get your working directory, or whatever the directory that you want to access, what you can do is you can use a function set WD, which is set working directory. And then this allows you to access whatever directory that is. And then whatever files you have in it, you have access to, since that is your working directory now within R. We don't have an example for that since everyone's got different directories on the computer, but just something to keep in mind when going about reading data. And then the last function is dir, which is just directory. What we want to do again is just put your cursor here, hit enter, and then just type in dir. In order to complete it, you can just press tab. And then for this, if you type in this, you can see what files you have within your current working directory. So that way, if you have a data set and it doesn't happen to be in your working directory, you can kind of see right here. Yeah, what's in there. So scrolling down now to packages, like we mentioned before, the tidyverse thing that we did at the beginning is a package. And with that package, there's a bunch of different new functions that they have. So by loading it in, you have access to all those functions. You can use it within your R file. And then, like we did before, install packages for whatever package name you want. Usually you would search up on the web, know what you're trying to do, and then usually odds are there's a package for that. So when you're first time installing it, you want to do install.packages and then put the package name in parentheses or in quotations, sorry. And then once you do have that package in, you could just use the library function in order to load it in without needing any quotations. And then if you need any information on the package that you have loaded in, you can use the library function with the help parameter, and you can do help equals and the package name quotations. So for reading in data, which is arguably one of the first steps that you'll go through when doing any sort of analysis, there's a few ones that you can use when in base R. One is read.table with the parentheses. And then this reads in a file in the table format, and it takes a table formatted file and then essentially creates a data frame out of it. And a data frame is kind of like a way that the data is arranged within R. And then within those parentheses, you're going to want to put your table name or your file name as well in quotations. And then the second and probably the more popular one is read.csv. So similar to read.table, it just takes your CSV file, puts it into a data frame. And then from there, you can kind of do whatever you want with it with some R functions. And then, like I mentioned, for read.table, you just put your file name in quotations within those parentheses. So now we're going to move on to data types. There's a few that we're going to cover. The first is logical or binary, I guess, where there's just two options. So examples are true or false, 1 or 0. And then with the file that we have right now, we're going to write a little bit of code. Yeah, so what we want to do is we want to put our cursor here, press enter, so we have more space inside the code chunk. And what we're going to do is we're going to write head. So head essentially just gives like the first few values of whatever you're looking for. And then from here, what we're going to do is we're going to call empty cars, which is our data set here. And then $sign. And what you do for the $sign is it accesses the whatever columns you have in that data set, or in this case, whatever variables you have in the data set. So what we're going to do here is there is a variable called AM, which essentially just means automatic. And then if we run this code chunk, it should produce, the first 6 values within that column, that data set. So you can see that there's only 1 zeros. And then if you do look at like the documentation for the data set, it shows that 0 means the car is manual, 1 means the car is automatic. So there's really only 2 values for that variable. And then the second data type, which is pretty self-explanatory, is just numeric data. And this could be anything, either like a whole number, like 13, or a floating point number. And I believe in R is called double instead of floating point. So for this one, what we can do is we can look at, we can do something similar to what we did before, is we use the head function and then empty cars, which is our data set, and then $sign again. And then we'll just look at miles per gallon. And once we do that, you can see that the first few values for the miles per gallon are numbers, numerical. And these are floating point rather than whole numbers. And then there are character data types as well. That's kind of self-explanatory, anything with letters. But it also can be numbers if you specify it that way. And then lastly, or one of the last ones is factors. And what factors are essentially categorical variables that have different levels to them. We'll go into that depth into that later. But just to kind of show you an example of factors, what we can do is we can call our data set, and then there's a variable within the data set that's called gear, which is essentially just how many gears that car has. And then the assigning function, I guess, within R is not an equal sign, but it's actually an arrow. So it's like left pointing caret and then just like a dash. And then what we want to do is we want to convert this value into a factor. So in order to convert anything into a different data type, what you can do is you can do as dot and then the data type that you're trying to get to. For this, we're going to do it as dot factor, and then essentially just put in the same column here, gear. Since it is, so gears are like, 3 gears, 4 gears, 5 gears, so it automatically reads in as numerical. But if we do want to make it into a factor, we have to do this. And then once we do that, we can hit enter and then write another line of code, which is essentially just looking at what type of data type it is. So it's data.class gives you the type of data type it is, and then we're just going to do empty cars $sign here. We can see that now. And then the last data type is the datetime data type, or date/POSIX CT. Date is actually a data type itself that stores just the date. The POSIX CT also has a date and the time. So if you want more accurate, or if your data set is organized that way, you can choose POSIX CT as your data type. And now we'll move on to object types.
Okay. So the next things we've already gone over kind of the types of values that you can have, but there's also different object types in R. So there's 5 of them. There are vectors, matrices, data frames, lists, and function. So I'll go over each one individually, give you kind of an idea of what they are and what they do. So the first one is vector. Basically, it's just a one-dimensional collection of elements of the same data type. And you can access them with those square brackets. Essentially, you can think of this kind of like a list, but there is a distinction between a vector and a list, so don't get them confused. Basically, to create a vector, we can just use the concatenate function. So let's say we want to create a vector of different ID values. So let's say we want to name it ID or IDs, and then the concatenate function is just a C and parentheses. And let's say we want to do 112, 113, 114, and 115. Those would be our different ID values that we're going to be putting into the vector. And then I'll run this in a second, but we can also make vectors with different data types. So we can do characters, for example. So let's say we want to make a new one with names. We can do the same thing. We can concatenate different names together. So let's just do Michaela, Aiden. Okay, cool. Oops. There we go. Okay, so now basically we're creating two different vectors. The first one, IDs, is going to be filled with numeric values, and the second one, names, is going to be filled with character values. And then if we want to get them returned to us, if we want to see the contents, all we have to do is just type the names down here. And then if we run it, we can see our two different vectors. First one's numeric, second one is characters. Does that make sense? Cool. The second data or object type is the matrix. So basically, this is a two-dimensional collection of vectors of the same data type. So essentially, this is just two vectors combined together, kind of creating some sort of like grid. I guess you can think of it like that. Same thing as before, you can access them with those square brackets. I'm going to go over all that like accessing stuff later, so you don't have to worry about it too much right now. I'll scroll up. Okay, to create a vector, we basically combine to create a matrix, we can create, okay, wow, English is hard. To create a matrix, we can blend together two vectors. So say we want to do one with, I don't know, I'll name it info. So we can do cbind, which is basically column bind, and we'll combine the ID column and the name column, or the ID vector and the name vector. So we'll type in IDs and names, which are the two names of our vectors. And essentially what this is doing is it's taking the vector of IDs and it's putting it in a column and it's combining it with the vector of names in another column. So it'll be a matrix. We can also do rbind, but that would do IDs as the top row and names as the bottom row, and that's not what we want. And then we'll also print this out. So if we just want to enter down and type out info, and then if we run it, you can see that is our matrix right there. And then notice that when we do this, those ID numbers are no longer numeric. They are now characters. So this obviously isn't really what we want. I mean, I know IDs are kind of a categorical type variable, but usually when we have numbers in a data set, we want it as a numeric. We don't want it as a character. So to fix that, we can use a data frame instead. So this is essentially a collection of vectors of different data types. So this is what most R functionality is designed to work with. And similarly, you can access the elements of a data frame with those square brackets as well. So typically we want to use these data frames instead of the matrices. So we will basically create the same data frame right here as we did with the matrix. And let's just do info df for info data frame. And we'll basically just do data.frame is going to be our function. And we can throw together the IDs and the names. So we'll pull those two vectors back in again. And if we run that and just call out, we type out info df, it'll return it for us. We can see down here that we have essentially the same data, but now it's in a data frame. And we can see that those IDs are now numeric. So if we want to get the structure of this and get a little bit more information, we can type the function str structure and then type in our data frame name. So info df. We run that. Now we can see we get this output down here. And it shows us the number of observations, number of variables. And then we can see now that the IDs are a numeric data type, which is what we want. So that is good. And then similarly, there's different things you can do. The dimension function, which is dim for info data frame, that'll bring up basically the same information, number of rows, number of columns. Or there's like n row, which will pull up the number of rows, or n all, which will pull up the number of columns. Yeah, so you can see 4 rows, 2 columns, same thing comes out down here. There's just different ways of getting the same information. And then we can also change the variable names in a data frame. Okay, so essentially you can use the names function. So we do names and then type in our data frame name, info df. We can assign different names to those. So right now our names, if we go up, are IDs and names. So say we want to change those to something else. We can concatenate the 2 different names together. This is where it gets a little weird. You can't just like type out the names. You have to put them in that concatenate function. So let's say we want to put that in capital letters or something. I don't know. And then we can do, well, it's essentially the same thing, but basically you can change the names like this. And then if we reprint out the data frame, we can see that the names are now different and they are adjusted to what we want. And then there's another way we can add variables to the data frame. And that is basically putting on like a new column. So if we want to add another variable for amount, for example, there's a couple ways we can do this. The first one I'll go over is just, we'll do like info df. So if we type out the data frame name and do that $sign again, we can basically type in a new variable. So it's kind of weird that you can call it like that when it doesn't already exist, but that's one way to do it. And then basically we'll just add in, let's say, actually, sorry, I'm gonna move that down. Let's create amounts first. Sorry, we're going back a step. Okay, so for amounts, let's just create a vector that has, I don't know, 200, 300, 400, 500. Cool. Now we can add it on. So now if we do info df and then that $sign, and we want to create a new variable called amount, that's just a random name, but we're going to call it that. And then we can assign to that variable that new vector we just created. So we're creating the vector here, and then we're throwing it in, assigning it to this variable name amount down here. So let's see, I'll just print it out again down here. Have it returned, I guess. So now we can see we have a new variable called amount once we add that in. Is that making sense to everyone? I know it gets a little weird right there. Yeah, okay. And then there's one other way you can add a variable. You can C-bind it on. So if we say want to do, I'll just add amounts on again. We can do info df, and we're gonna keep it as, I guess, already what it is. We're gonna C-bind together what we already have, and then we're going to put that amounts vector on the end of it, essentially. So this is gonna put a new column on there. We're binding on this amounts column at the end. So if we do that and then run it, I'll kind of show you what it does. So we should have a new column now that's called amounts. So yeah, so this was from our first run through when we just used the $sign to add it on. This fourth column over here, that's when we did the C bind. That's how we got that last one. So that's why there's 2 there. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah, okay. The fourth element or fourth object type is list. So basically this is just a collection of elements of different data types. Most function output is a list. So oftentimes when you call a function and you get an output and there's multiple values, it's going to come out as a list. And you can access the elements once again with the square bracket index, which returns a list, or if you do the double brackets, it'll return the actual value instead of returning another list, basically. But that probably doesn't make sense to you right now, so it will later. Right? Okay, so we can make a list with that C function like we did with the vector. The difference is that if we are combining data types, it's going to be as a list. So let's say, actually, I'm going to call it. Okay, so let's say we want to create a list called random. We can use the concatenate function again. Let's say we want to do 1, 2, 3, and then let's throw in some character data types too. Okay, do that. And then we get the list returned. We can see now that we have our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it took in those numerics and the characters. And then once again, we can access those with the brackets. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing because it kind of depends if you want to do 1 bracket or 2, it kind of changes your output a little bit. So let's do a couple examples. So for example, if we want to access the third element, if we want to pull out that 3, we can type in our list name and then do our square brackets and just type in a 3. And that's going to pull out our third element. We do it like that. There we go. There's our 3. There's our third element. We want to pull out our 5th element. We can do the same thing. Pulls out our 5th element too. If we want to pull out multiple elements, actually these should be we want to pull out multiple elements, we can just use a colon. So let's say we want to pull out the 3rd through 5th element. And we get 3, 4, 5, 3rd through 5th. So it's a little bit interesting because if you want to pull out the value by itself, not in a list, you'll usually want to use double brackets. And the reason for that is like you can have a list of lists. So say your first element in the list is a list in and of itself. Second one is another list. If you want to pull out that very first list, you'll need to use double, or the very first element, you'll have to use double. So we could do like double brackets around the 3 and it would give us the correct thing back, but we cannot use double brackets around the bottom one because we can't be pulling out more than 1 element, not as a list, if that makes sense. It's a little confusing. I'm probably not explaining it very well. Does that kind of make sense? A little bit. Yeah, okay. If you have questions, let me know. Okay, functions, these we've already been using them, but there's some important ones that I think are way more helpful than others or that you'll use way more often. So there's ones like mean, sum, minimum, maximum, square root, length, standard deviation, all those good things. So let's just, for example, pull out, let's say we want to find the average amount in our data frame. So we could do mean, and then we would type in our data frame, info df, and then we'll do our $sign to pull out a specific column. Say we want to do amount, you can either click on it or type it out, doesn't matter. And then if you run that, then you'll get, that is the average of our amount column, 350. I'm not going to go through the other ones because they're essentially the same thing, but you can get different calculations. There's also general math functions. So say we decide that we want a new column that's like 100 less than the amounts we have. So we can basically just adjust that down. So if we do like info ds and we create a new value or a new column that's amount adjusted, say that's what we're doing here. What we can do is we can do the info ds, the original column of amount, and we can just subtract 100 from it. So with the subtraction, multiplication, addition type stuff, you can just simply use the subtraction there. So I'll print that so you can see how it adds up. Oops. Sorry, one second. Apparently I want to play DS. Okay. So now we can see that it added that amount adjusted column. That's basically just 100 less of all the amounts that we had previously. Does that kind of make sense? You can use those basic math functions or the, I guess, functions with parentheses. Cool. Okay. We have kind of a lot more to go in like no time. So I don't know if I even want to get into indexing.
Anyone have any questions?
Did everyone get to where we kind of ended and understand where we're at? Yeah. Okay.
Is there anything specific?
Graphing,
I mean,
we could.
yeah, we had a
Yeah.
decent amount more to cover.
Yeah, there's, we overestimated how much time we had. Say that again, sorry. Yeah, I mean, the code's not in there.
We can post the one, if we have a similar file with the code in it. So we can post that way you don't.
Yeah. Yeah, we can post the rest of it. Also, if you guys want, we can do like our workshop part 2 and finish off the stuff that we didn't get to.
Yeah, we don't have any plan for week 9, so if you guys are gonna do week 10. We might do that either end of this quarter or beginning of next quarter. And then we'll also add on some other stuff like some intermediate stuff, I guess. For you guys to try out. But yeah, we'll post that file on Slack. So keep an eye out for it. Cool.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I
Thank you.
All right, well, we got through like a solid half.
No, I kind of threw you under the bus there. I took you a little long.
I took a long time. Sorry, Colin.
No worries.
I don't think Connor minds.
Oh, really?
For what?
Oh, wait.
Oh,
Wait,
wait,
are you
but-
guys doing Saturday or Sunday?
Saturday. Yeah, I know we're competing.
Sunday would be rough. No, really.
That would be rough, dude. We had to cancel our soccer game.
Really?
Cancel, reschedule.
Good job. Get it out there.
Great job. Good work.
You die or hurt me? No, I'm telling you fucking with you.
I do that one for sure. Maybe I will, and then just throw you off.
One regret was used.
Yeah, so you do the contract, and all that.
Yeah, I did
Okay.
I got negative 19. I wouldn't check it. Pretty nice. Yeah. And he said last time, he's checking on. Yeah. Oh, nice. Less stressing. Yeah, good. I can bring them with me to class. We also have yeah, do we live in like a super like
That's actually really cute.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone's gonna go trick-or-treating around like.
I wonder if that's more on your mind.
They were pretty much.
probably.
Probably dealing with.
Yeah.
Either one, we're both dealing with a lot at home.